Okay, so today we were talking about word limits. So this is basically there's a reason for this. Let's just put it this way. I'm stammering a lot because I feel like the shock is going to hit hard, or at least it did for me. So the Scary Story Contest has changed its rules. If any of you were considering entering at all, the rules have changed. 99% of them are the same. There's just a little problem if you like really long short stories. The word limit is 1,200 words.
Okay, I'm out of here.
So, as a result,
good lord.
But yes, also unfortunately, after talking to my supervisor, because of the fact that other people are in charge of it, it is not going to count towards the grand prize / raffle at the end of the year. I wanted it to, but ultimately after talking with her, because of the fact that it's technically going through us, but it is being run by the Friends of the Library, we have to ask them, and it's a whole big hassle, so as a result, we're not going to include it. I'm sorry. However, by all means, do it anyway. However, keep in mind the word limit is 1,200 words. Speaking of which, that's why our lesson today is on word limits, because this unfortunately is not the first time that I've seen this kind of thing. There are a lot of contests, especially very prestigious, high-end contests for short stories that give you insane word limits, like 1,200 words or less. I've seen this before. This is not the first time, but at the same time, I was a little surprised, a little shook. So I figured I'd talk to you guys about my top tips for dealing with word limits. Now, this obviously will help you and help apply to the short stories that I do as well for those contests, because it also has a word limit, but the word limit is extraordinarily higher for my contest, because I realize that it is hard to write a really, really well done story with short amount of time. Can it be done? 100%. Is it difficult? Also, absolutely. So today we're going to go over some things that might help you with my contest, and in specific this contest, to deal with word count problems. So I'm going to erase the title, and we're going to keep going. Alright. Now, one thing I will say is it might sound impossible to do 1,200 words, but I've not only run into contests that have done this and have had winners that were fabulous, but I've actually challenged myself, and I'm going to have someone else grade my entry, obviously, because I'm not going to grade my own entry. Duh. But I'm going to have someone else grade my entry, and I'm going to enter too. So I have actually already tried this, and I did manage to make it under 1,200 words, but I also have a degree in creative writing. So
well, that might help a little bit.
Exactly. So I was like, if you're struggling, don't feel bad. I'm not saying this to be like, oh, of course you can do it. I'm saying this as in, like, it is doable. Just know that it might be a difficulty. All right. So that being said, after panicking, here's what I did to help my story be shorter. Because I did panic myself. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not even sure. Like, sitting here going, like, degree in creative writing coming in clutch right now, because I've never had to do this before. I've seen the contest, but I've always just immediately looked at the word count and gone, nah, pass. Even though I know it's doable. So I decided to challenge myself, and here we are. So first thing that I would say is reading. And when I say read, I mean read specifically short stories that fit within this word count. How do you know that? Well, generally stories that fit within this word count. So generally stories that are fit within this word count are about 2 to 3 pages in published print. So as a result, you can generally guess about that.
That seems too small.
When I say 2 to 3 pages, I know, right? When I say 2 to 3 pages, I mean single-sided, not double-sided. So like 1, 2, 3. So technically one full and then one one-sided.
I thought it was
Yeah.
2 full pages.
Yeah, so it would be 2 full pages if it's double-spaced times New Roman 12-point font. But that's not the standard for when you actually have your book published in print. So that's why it's different. It's because it's single-spaced. Generally 11-point font, sometimes 12-point font for actual books, print books. And so that is part of the reason why it is drastically different than what you might be thinking in your head. So, that being said, I would say I would highly encourage you to read short stories, and even maybe Google world's shortest stories, and things like that. And then look at what they do. There's a lot to learn from this. One of my favorites that I believe was under the 1,200 word count is the Raven one from Edgar Allan Poe, because it's basically a poem, right? And he's constantly being like, dude, why are you torturing me? And the Raven's just like, ha. But it ultimately ends up being really scary because it does feel like the Raven is mocking him. It feels like the Raven knows something that he doesn't and is slowly driving him to insanity. But that being said, that proves that it can be done. It's just difficult. If you study stories like this that are under the 1,200 word limit, I would bet that you are going to learn a lot, because I certainly did. I looked at them and went, huh, there is actually a lot that I can get out of this and apply to my own writing. It is definitely difficult, for sure, but at the same time, being able to analyze writing is something that would be really good for you in general. That way, when you read a novel, you can say, oh, their first chapter was super exciting. Why is it super exciting? How can I build a similar idea in my own chapters? The best part about this is the fact that you can spin it your own direction. For example, the second book of the, oh man, I can't remember the official name of the series, but the False Prince series, where he's basically like, I was late to my own assassination. The sass, the intrigue, you know, you're just like, holy crap, that's a sentence. I love that
I have so many questions.
So many questions that will all be answered within that first chapter. Exactly. There's so many questions. Or like, yes, you don't want to be a half-blood or whatever it was. Like, yes, such a great first line. And you can do similar things with your first line. Why does it make it intriguing? Well, for example, with the False Prince series second book, I don't remember the first one, I'm sorry, but I do remember the second book's line. That one, it pulls you in because you're going, whoa, 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 what? You're being very casual about something that's very not casual.
Yeah, when I started reading Percy Jackson, my brother was like, you're gonna like the name of the chapter, it's very good. And then,
Yes, he does have fun chapter
yeah.
titles that make you go,
That's what I strive for.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
really unhinged titles. It's like,
yes, and especially ones that make you question. Not like, in this chapter, they gain superpowers.
no.
That's not an interesting chapter title. However, if you say, I ate a sandwich, everyone's like, why is this sandwich important?
Yeah, I've actually tried to do that, but
So-
I've also, when I said that to other people, it kind of made them very concerned for my sanity.
But yeah, so long story short, reading short stories can very much help you to learn not only how to analyze writing, but also in this case, learn how to analyze good short story writing and what helps make it great. We're going to talk about some of the things I learned from reading short stories and then applying them to my own entry. But you don't necessarily have to say that this is all you can learn. You can pick up some short stories and read them yourself. I would actually highly recommend. Yes, question.
What counts as a word? If I had.
No.
Just blink slowly.
So if I have no spaces in my entire story, would that technically be one word?
Technically, but no one could read.
But if I put slashes,
Then it would become a word.
Yeah, I think at that point we'd have to disqualify you. I'm sorry. If you put dashes or slashes instead of spaces, I'm sorry, but you will be disqualified. It is still technically one word. However, I don't think that my colleagues would agree with that.
no punctuation whatsoever.
Anyway, but that being said, with short stories, one thing that I can say, this is not under the 1,200 word limit. However, it is 2,000 words and under, so this can still be valuable to you to learn from. There's actually an anthology called A Universe of Stories, I believe. It is under UNI in the adult science fiction and fantasy section. I am actually in that particular anthology. It was part of the summer writing contest years and years and years ago, and they actually had a publisher judge, and he decided he wanted to publish them. He was very nice. So, as a result, technically one of my shortest stories is in there, as well as several others. They're all 2,000 words and under. It's a very tiny little book. It's blue. If you want to check it out, by all means do. I would highly recommend it to help learn a little bit. And I'm not saying learn for me. I personally think my entry is by far not one of the best in there. I got 3rd place. But at the same time, there are a lot of really fantastic entries in there that you can learn a lot from because they're super short. And so you can learn how to master the shortness. There are also a lot of other fantastic short story anthologies. If you want me to gear you in their direction, I'm more than happy to. No guarantee they'll be under the word count, though. That one I just know because of the contest word limit being 2,000. Yes, question?
Word limits for the other content?
Yes, so there are word limits for the other contests, except the other contest, the word limit is 6,000 words. I do have a recommended minimum of 1,500 words, but that is only because I've had a couple people enter in the past that have entered one very paragraph.
Only a paragraph?
And it's not even like a great paragraph. It's just like, there was a dog, and now the world ended. And I'm like, okay. So, that being said, that's why I added the word minimum, is because I was like, this is recommended to at least well-round it for your average writer. And I do say average writer. There are some writers who can do phenomenal things with 200 words or less. But the average writer typically needs at least 1,500 words, which is part of the reason why we're discussing it today, because it's 300 words less than my typical generalized notice of people doing well. Note that it is, again, not impossible, just
Very, very difficult.
very, very difficult, yes. So, next thing that I would say, aside from reading short stories and then analyzing them for how they're going, no worries. Just leave the door partially open so that way other people can get in. Is to simplify. And yes, I've done this before with a different lesson talking about short story writing, but that one was talking about short stories in general, irregardless of word count. When I say simplify here, I did not mean the same thing that I meant in my short story lesson. In my short story lesson, I was like, oh yeah, make it simpler, make it so it's nicer to read. This one, I mean like, take the heart of your concept and just do that. No bones, no other organs, no body, just the heart.
I'm reading, it's called Murder on Moonlit Manor.
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of them were building up her job and her
Yeah.
worries, and I'm just gonna have to cut straight to the knife.
Straight to the heart. Yep. That is how you're gonna get under 1,200 words, unfortunately. But yes, so for other contests, by all means, spend time working up to it. Spend time having us get to know our characters. But for ones like this, that have a word count so severe, you basically have to cut out everything but the heart. Just literally go to your beautiful body of a gorgeous story, rip out the heart, and just use that. Because we're talking about scary stories, I figured it'd be apt imagery.
That's fair.
Yes, what were you going to say?
Never mind. 2-sentence horror stories are a thing.
Exactly.
But it's like,
it's doable, but it's hard. It's difficult. I'm going to talk more about scary stories specifically at the end of the lesson, so don't worry. I'm going to do a little recap. I did a little lesson on scary stories before, and I'm going to recap some of my top tips from that. So, that being said, with simplification, the best thing that I would recommend is to make your story absolutely 100% in late, out early. That is going to also help you. Because of the fact that, like you said, you have a lot of build-up, and which is great in other contests, but when you have a word limit, you gotta cut all of that out. And you gotta just say, okay, what's the most interesting thing that happens in that story? Start there. If they kill someone, start there. If they discover a murdered body, start there. Whatever's the most interesting thing in your story, start right there. Don't even give them any detail. Basically just be like, guess what, we're here now. And that works. It's kind of like the being late to your own assassination thing. That's in the dead middle of the story. You are confused now. But then he explains what just happened.
Yeah, but like seriously, it was late to my own assassination. What?
Exactly, but then that's how you have to start your own short story. You have to just hit them right off with them. Yes, just confuse them and then just have them slowly gain the answers as they go. Yes, question?
What is the prompt for this competition?
There is no prompt for this competition. It is just write a story that is scary. It can be a humorous scary story, or a spooky story, or a horror story. However, it just needs to make sure that it builds suspense, but omits graphic depictions of violence. So,
Does poison count? Can you
Um,
poison one of your characters?
yeah, that's fine. But
That
it's
works.
it's more just we're avoiding the category of like slashers, you know, like stab, 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 blood and guts everywhere. We don't want that. Yes. So that is the main thing, is that we've had a couple stories that people used to enter before we had that rule that were, whoa. That story would. I did not actually have the privilege of reading those because they get disqualified because they were so intense. But at the same time, from what I was hearing from my coworker, she was like, if the story could drip as much blood as was in it, I would be drowning. Like, it's a problem. Yeah, so this is why we're like, just don't do graphic violence. And when we say don't do graphic violence, that doesn't mean you can't be violent. It just means that you have to imply it instead of actually showing it. A great example of this is actually Mr. Beeson, if any of you guys know him from the high school. And if you don't, he's a lovely creative writing teacher. If you go to American Fork High School, you should try to get him. He's great. But he actually wrote a story, and one of the scariest parts of the story actually does not happen. Instead, they say simply they're going to test the experiment, and they've already implied what the experiment is. And so as a result, they end the story there. You know what you're pretty sure happens. But at the same time, he doesn't describe it in graphic, violent detail. He just says, we're gonna do that now. And so as a result, it's just heavily implied. It's kind of like in those PG-13 movies where you know they absolutely stabbed someone, but instead all they show is like someone screaming and it's just their shadows. That's kind of what you want here.
Okay, so,
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so if I explicitly like show the one of the dudes.
Poison is less of an issue. When they say graphic depictions of violence, they're more looking for stabbing, slashing, punching people in the gut and having them explode. Like,
Poison is okay.
yes, having someone get poisoned
Yeah.
is perfectly fine. It's
But
mainly
don't
the
get
issue of
distracted,
blood,
you know,
guts,
this
gore,
can
that
turn
kind of
grit-
stuff.
Choke
Yeah.
it.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
not really-
I would recommend going with your classic, good old, they're foaming at the mouth and then all of a sudden they're like, "Wah,"
Yeah, and
on the
that's
floor.
not-
That's still scary,
so
exactly.
violent.
It's not super violent. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I've
traumatized.
seen a very graphic,
Yeah.
like, bloody movie, and I was just like, makeup artist, good job.
This is fair. That's for sure. Anytime I see like zombie movies, I'm like, wow, you really went heavy on that makeup there, sir. Anyway, but it's great. The people are really talented with that, man. Anyway, that being said, this is a great way to simplify things. It also helps to simplify things because of the fact that then you're not having this big elaborate concept where it's like, and it was secretly you the whole time. Like that's not what we're looking for here. We're not like, yes, can it be great? 100%. Please do that for the Cozy Mystery Contest. I would love a good twist. But I also am giving you 6,000 words. So with 1,200 words, I would highly recommend no twists. You know what the monster is from the beginning. You know what the scary thing is from the beginning. Or if you don't know what the scary thing is, you never find out.
Ooh, that's
So that actually helps make it scary without needing to have all of this like twists and turns and plot,
plot.
Like plot is important, but you need to make sure that your plot, instead of going like this is a classic novel plot structure. That's probably what a lot of you are running into, is you're trying to do this. Great for a novel, not great for a short story. For a short story that's 1,200 words or less, you want boop, boop, boop. You want a very tiny exit, a very tiny introduction. And when I say very tiny, I mean like, I was like to my own assassination tiny. Like, the first sentence introduces you into the inciting incident. The end. And then the exit is basically left off either on a cliffhanger or as they're barely discovering it, you leave it off on a different kind of cliffhanger. Like, let's say there was this one thriller I watched recently that was nice and scary. That was basically about what if escape rooms, if you didn't escape in time, you died. And I would say there's a decent amount of cussing in it, so if you don't like cussing, maybe don't watch it. But
that like
it is
a
really well done.
show
Yeah,
or
it's
movie?
called
What is
Escape
that?
Room.
Okay.
And it is, I think it's on Hulu and Amazon Prime. But yeah, yeah, I would highly recommend it. Like I said, it is PG-13 because there is a fair amount of cussing in it, but at the same time, and people die, obviously. Other reason why it's PG-13. But at the same time, I would highly recommend it because it is a very well done thriller. And part of what's so well done about it is the fact that the introduction to it is very short. They all get a puzzle box. You all know what their names are. They solve the puzzle box, they get a ticket, they arrive at the escape room. Very short. You know what's gonna happen, you know where they're going. And then from that point forward, it immediately starts ramping up and immediately starts getting intense. And so as a result of that, it's a great example. Even though, yes, it is a very long movie, ultimately they could have made it a very short movie and just had almost everyone die in the first escape room if they wanted to. Spoiler alert. There are layers, but it is good. But anyway, but yes, there's a second one called Tournament of Champions as well, but they don't think they're gonna make a third one, unfortunately, because the Tournament of Champions kind of bombed, which was sad because it was actually good. But that being said, it really knew how to ramp it up because it kept it simple. Escape rooms can kill you. That is the concept. It didn't have to be elaborate, it didn't have to be crazy, it didn't have to be wild, it didn't have to have plot twists everywhere. It was just like, this is it in its simplicity. And that's kind of what you're looking for with really strict word counts, is a concept that's super simple. Super basic. You could write down that concept in one sentence. And a very short one sentence. If you're having any trouble with your concept, please let me know and we can talk about it.
Maybe I'll do a different story because the story I'm doing, like really.
It needs more time.
Especially because like I'm gonna have plot twist that the boyfriend is a murderer. I can't. What?
We're talking about scary stories and short stories. Anyway.
I'm gonna have that. I need to build up his character so people actually like him, and it's more of a betrayal, and it's not just like.
Exactly.
Oh, I knew it all along. We hate you.
Exactly. Which is kind of what you need for this. Is you either need to never figure it out, or you need to, when you solve it,
What's that?
you don't know whether or not it will keep going or whatever. So on
I
and so
can
forth.
write down the
So,
website for you.
next thing that I would
Okay,
say that you
that's a
should
good
do when writing very condensed short stories is to limit your characters to
Got it.
one.
Yeah,
or
it
two.
is right here. I
That's it.
use it all the time.
With
because
6,000 plus word
something
short
about
stories,
this.
you're fine to do like 3 or 4. But even then, I would say don't do more than 3 or 4. Once you start hitting 5 or 6, that's too many even to introduce in the first couple pages of a novel. Yes. Generally, that is a good rule. 5 or 6 characters you should introduce over the course of a novel, not in the first few chapters. That is too much.
Can I introduce 3?
Yes, 3 is perfectly fine. That's why most people, like in Harry Potter, for instance, you know, you have Ron, you have Hermione, you have Harry Potter, and then you have a couple other side characters. But if they are serious main characters, you should introduce them slowly throughout the course of the novel, which you don't have the word count to do here. So as a result, yes, question.
I'm just wondering, you know the story that I wrote for
Yes.
the thing? Was that an okay example? Like, as
Yes.
Avengers film, that was okay?
Mhm.
Because he was kind of important.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was very important, but at the same time, he wasn't the main character, so
Yeah.
you introduced him at the end,
Okay.
which
Just wondering
worked.
if that was good.
Yeah,
Great.
pacing-wise, that worked perfectly well. If you'd introduced them all at the beginning, that would have been a bit much.
Okay.
But because you introduced them at the end, it helped give us a sense of foreboding, and it also helped us to not have to be like, as a reader, I gotta memorize all of these names and I don't remember them all.
That has happened so many times.
And that's what you don't want to happen in your story.
There's a whole like.
Yes. You were like, ah!
It helps with the Scorpion and Reddit for English.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
I had
Oh my
to
gosh,
keep-
I've read that one. I know what you're talking
I
about.
had to keep going back to the family tree. Like, who's this guy?
Who's this guy? Yes, that is an issue. With that being said, when you have a story that is anywhere between 2,000 to 6,000 word limit.
There's a mini spider right here.
Oh, funsies, feel free to squish it.
No.
Okay. So if you have a word limit between 2,000 and 6,000 words, I would say 3 to 4 characters is acceptable, but generally try to introduce them slowly. Don't be like, there's Frida and Jacob and all over the first few
Why did
seconds.
you
Don't
do
do that.
Unless it's like
You're gonna confuse the
unless it's
readers.
like, okay, thank you.
Unless it's
Yeah.
like Scooby-Doo, but
Why?
even then you gotta make sure, like Scooby-Doo, that they are drastically different people. If they are too similar, then they just start blending into one
There's
person and
another
it's
one.
just confusing. So, yes, but the trick with Scooby-Doo, they made them purposely stereotyped because then you'd never get them confused.
And like the different coloring.
And the different coloring and things like that. And so as a result, their personalities were so drastically different that there was no way you were going to get them mixed up. If you have a bunch of characters who are all cheerleaders, we're going to get confused. Exactly. We're all going to be like, anyway.
Unless
So-
if the story takes place in cheerleading.
True, but even then you want to make sure all of your cheerleaders have a distinctly different thing. Otherwise the reader's just going to be like, I don't know, Bobby died, but I don't even know who Bobby is. So, when you're doing 1,200 words or less, like in the case of this scary story contest, I would highly recommend doing 1 or 2 characters at most. If you introduce a third character, have it be a character that you foreshadowed since the beginning, kind of like with yours with the villain, where we knew he existed, we just didn't know what he was about, and introduce him at the end and kind of leave it off on a cliffhanger. A great example of this is the Escape Room movie, for instance. They introduce who runs the escape rooms at the very, very end. And so he's not an important character, but at the same time he is, because you're like, ooh, interesting. I wonder why you're in charge of this. Like, what kind of creepy psycho is in charge of this?
It was like, oh yeah, people didn't like murder gangsters anymore.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay. But anyway, so that being said, 1 or 2 is the best thing you can do if you have 1,000 to 1,500 word limit. Yes, question.
The scary story off a dream I had.
That can always
was
be
a
fun.
nightmare, and it was scary. And I think I could do no plot twist. Really, is there like absolutely no plot twist? And the
You're like,
plot
but it's still
twist-
scary.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe the plot twist. Can the plot?
Verse can be
So
written.
the whole thing was like she's stuck in her own dreams because being stuck is my dream. So if I had the monster be herself, that's so cheesy.
I wouldn't say
I
that's
am
necessarily
the
cheesy
enemy.
so long as it is well foreshadowed. That's the issue here, is just foreshadowing in abundance. And you don't necessarily have to hardcore foreshadow. You can always be like, confusing moments, blackouts, or things like that are common for those kinds of things. And then it's like, JK, I am the serial killer. That kind of thing. Yes, question.
There's this one game. Oh, I'm sorry.
We're all talking at once.
There's this one game, and it's called It's Not Me, It's the Monster in the Basement,
Mhm.
and it's really good.
Is she the monster in the
Yeah.
Is she the monster in the basement?
There's no
You're
monster
like,
in the
oh.
basement. She just pushed her parents down the stairs.
Wow, that's messed up.
What?
Anyway, so that being said, another great thing that you want to do if you're going to have a very limited word count is show, don't tell. Not even tactful telling. Because of the fact that tactfully telling, though beautiful and though it can be well done, is incredibly hard to do. And not only is it hard to master, but generally, in order to tactfully tell properly, it has to be long. A great example of this is Regency romance novels and Jane Austen.
Jane Austen.
Part of the reason they're so long is because of the fact that she goes like, every rich man must be in need of a wife, and blah, blah, blah. And then she explains why he's in need of a wife. And then she explains how she plans to be a wife one day. And like, it just keeps going, right? Because she has to, in some ways, give you more detail so that way you're not confused. But because of this, tactful telling doesn't really work for 1,200 word limits. Can it? Yes. But if you want to like take hard mode of 1,200 word limit and turn it into like extreme hard mode, then do that. I would highly recommend to show, don't tell, because of the fact that when you show something, you can pack in tons of detail into one sentence. You can say, Oh yes, her ebony hair flowed in the wind as a
What
venomous
does
look
ebony
was in
mean?
her eyes. Black.
Oh.
I would highly recommend you go to a thesaurus, Google all the different colors. You will find a glorious
Thesaurus.
amount of beautiful words.
That's what I do all the time.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yes. But that being said, is the fact that you can pack a lot of detail into one sentence because of that. As a result, you learn what her eye color is, you learn what her hair color is, you learn that she has a venomous look in her eyes. Those all things, you're suddenly like, huh, okay. I've been told a lot about this character. Exactly. More than likely a villain, has black hair, has green eyes. You've learned all that
Hey,
in one
black
sentence.
hair and green eyes doesn't mean villain.
No, I know. I was just what I wanted to describe. Anyway, yes, question.
How do you spell it? Ebony? So what?
Ebony?
Ebony. Ebony.
E-B-O-N-Y.
Yes, it's basically ebony, but it's pronounced ebony.
How do you
It's so
just become
But yes, feel free to again Google, like if you, and you can also Google paint colors. Say names of paint colors for white, and then you'll get like all sorts of things like dove gray and eggshell, yes, and ivory, and it's great. I would highly recommend it because it will enhance your prose instead of just using color words. If you'll notice, a lot of books do that too, where they use other color words. They don't just say green, purple, blue. They say
or they
violet
describe
or
stuff that
sapphire.
has the same color and then they say like something blue, like
Mhm.
I don't know,
Exactly,
sky
but then it
blue.
gives you a shade of blue, and so as a result,
Blue's
it's
a
giving.
very
So
wide
having,
color variety.
but then even just having a word that people know means that color can be really helpful too. For example, magenta. Everyone generally knows what that
Magenta
means.
is the best color because
It
one
is
of
a
my
good
favorite
color.
characters has. I stabbed myself.
Oh no.
I was sitting back and I had my pencil in my
So-
hand like
Does-
this, and it stabbed me.
Ouch! I'm
I
glad
just
you're
realized
okay.
I was wondering what
So,
it would
does
be
anyone
like.
need an example of showing and not telling? It's okay if you do. Okay, great. So an example of telling with the sentence I said earlier would be, she has black hair, she has green eyes, she is the villain.
She is not. You can't just say she is the villain.
I have seen people do that.
Wait, you have done that? Why?
Yes.
She is the bad guy of the
So,
story.
that is telling.
What if you
Yes.
say that she's the bad guy and she's not actually the bad guy?
Then in that case, you are a, what's it called?
The
Unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Yes.
You should be gentleman, thief, arsonate, Lupin. What's that return in?
Wait, I'm not for a while narrator.
But yes.
Actually sounds so fun to
It is
write.
fun to write for sure.
It's
However,
fun.
you have to be careful because of the fact that if you're too unreliable, the reader gets annoyed. The reader's like, okay, geez, nothing you say is true. So you have to give them just enough truth that they're constantly questioning whether or not what you say is real. That's better.
The
But
first
anyway.
chapter.
So, that being said, another example of showing and not telling is instead of saying, she was so anxious for this date, she felt like his eyes were staring into the back of her head, or something like that. Instead, you say...
Why are his eyes staring into the back of her head?
Well, maybe
Is
he's
he
entering the restaurant
Maybe
and staring
he's
because
like,
he's about to
your,
see
the
her.
back
Anyway.
of your head is pretty.
Anyway, but that being said, that's an example of telling. You're telling us she has anxiety. You are telling us that he is staring behind her.
Why is he staring behind her though?
But exactly, you can give so much more
That's kinda
context if
weird.
you show. For example, as he strolled into the restaurant, she glanced over and their eyes met. She looked back down at the table, desperately
Wait, those
clinging
Tinder
to it.
ads, do you believe in love at first sight?
Anyway,
I don't know,
let me
Sugar
finish,
Mumsy,
please.
do you? I do now.
Anyway, but yes, and then she clings to the table, her nails turning white or something like that. That shows that she is anxious about that. That shows that he is coming in behind her. That shows all of these things. Instead of just saying, she felt this way, she is this way.
She is this way because she has got a note from the doctor.
So, that is showing, not telling. Okay, focusing on lesson now. All right, so
Maybe his quirk is the ability to control his tears to make other people feel
all right,
bad.
So,
Except for Bakugo, because he's
not all stories thrive on attention to detail. Oh, can someone let Angela in because someone closed the door all the way? There we go. Angela. Hello. Anyway, so that being said, not all stories thrive on attention to detail, first off. Second off, when you do add detail, do it selectively. For example, Sky Blue is going to add 2 words to your 1,200 word count, whereas saying something like, whereas just saying something like Sapphire, 1 word, blue.
Sapphire is a cool color, though.
Exactly. It's a cool color, but it also is 1 word instead of 2. So as a result, when you're looking
Not
at
about
detail,
the word count, though.
yeah, it is when you have 1,200 word limit.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, that is this.
The lesson is one word
Yes,
count.
the lesson is about word limits and how to deal with them.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
Never mind then.
Yeah.
Keep talking.
So that being said, with attention to detail, it's totally fine to be as descriptive as you'd like in a novel, or if you have a higher word count. But when you're dealing with such a strict word count, the best thing that you can do to deal with that is to be very selective with your word choice. Make sure that you are picking words that can mean multiple different things and condensing it. Instead of using 4 or 5 words, use just 1. However, with that being said, you also want to make sure that the words you choose are giving you a sense of what it is. So, for example, like I said earlier, with venomous eyes, you can immediately imply that she's probably evil of some sort or has evil deeds in mind, right? But you don't say she has evil deeds in mind. That's a lot of words. Whereas with just saying she has a venomous stare, that's 2 words that convey the same thing.
Venomous
Yes.
stare.
Would have an unreliable narrator be like, she had venomous stare, and then she just sounds like RBF, like leave her alone.
Like, she's just sad. Leave her alone. Anyway, but yes, for sure with the unreliable narrator thing. But that being said, with detail, if you have a very low word count that you're dealing with, make sure that you pay attention to what kinds of words you're using, and make sure that, like you were talking about earlier, you don't necessarily need all of this detail. If it is necessary to tell the person's entire backstory in order to get to the plot, that's not the kind of story you want to be using here. You want to make sure that you can tell them what kind of person this character is in less than a sentence. If you're having trouble doing that, more than happy to help. That being said, I also would highly recommend 2 things when it comes to world building. Either basing it on real life, so that way it's not too hard for people to be like, oh, it's a bush. We know what a bush looks like. Whereas if you have it in a fantasy world, you're like, I don't know, the bush could be pink for all I know. Maybe it's poison. Maybe it's not. That makes it so the reader's extra confused, and you don't want more confusion and more things you need to explain in a tight word count. So as a result of that, I would highly recommend you either base it in real life or only tell them what is necessary. If it is not absolutely necessary to the story or the plot, they don't need to know.
The pink bush. They'll come back later and dye that bush green.
I would
Because
say also,
they hate pink bushes.
in general, look at it and then go, okay, is this necessary to the plot? If the answer is no, don't mention it. You can also do it in a very subtle way too, like I said with showing and not telling. Instead of saying the bush is pink and the bush is is filled with a deadly poison, instead you can just
There's
say
a dead squirrel.
exactly. There's a dead
by the-
squirrel
by
next
the
to the bush, and as a result, you're implying it's poisonous. You don't need to say
I love
that as much.
implying things. I like
Exactly.
implying
A
other
lot of
characters
short
as well.
stories are all about implication. You tell them what needs to be told, and the rest is implied. So, implying is actually a huge thing in very short stories, unfortunately, which is hard if you don't want to do that.
I mean, the dead squirrel next to the bush, I feel like if I were a reader, I'm just like, oh, poor squirrel, wonder what happened to him. I wouldn't think, oh, it's the bush's fault. I blame
Oh,
you.
the bush's
Well,
fine.
but then you could always have Barry
I
just
don't know,
dribbling
I'd
down
be
its
like,
mouth.
oh,
Ah.
that's
Now it's direct. So you just gotta gotta make sure with your implications that they're pretty dang direct.
I just
Um,
used to watch a bunch of Bright Side and the riddles with like the little squirrel.
Yes,
and
a
bush.
lot of the riddles and things like that are also helpful because of the fact that riddles rely on the fact that there is a lot of things implied. For example, the whole two guys go into a bar, one walks out and dies and the other doesn't die.
They got
Why?
poisoned.
And it's like they got poisoned, but it was in the ice cube, so the guy who took longer was poisoned because it was in the ice and it melted. So like that's all implied. It's not directly stated. And so as a result, I would highly recommend actually looking into those kinds of riddles because that's kind of the feel you want to give people with these horror stories.
The riddles aren't that the purpose of riddles?
The riddle is you don't know the answer generally unless you think about it really hard, which is why it's implied. That being said, I'm going to scroll down a little more and we're going to talk about it. Okay. So, now we're going to talk about the last, least fun thing about really short word counts like 1,200 words. What happens if you go over? And how to deal with that and fix it. So first off, content editing. This is when you go back through the story, read the entire thing and go, this scene isn't necessary. This information isn't necessary. I already told them that information, delete that. After you're done with that, if you still haven't hit the 1,200 word limit, I would highly recommend going through and deleting all of these types of words. The reason why is because 99% of the time they are superfluous. By all means, feel free to look at it and genuinely be like, is this necessary here?
Not for Pokemon though.
But I would highly recommend just deleting them outright because most of the time they are not necessary.
Oh yeah.
That being said,
my brother-in-law.
a great example of one of these words is suddenly.
Because the guy wanted to play.
Oh, I use that word so many times.
It is a known word. You're not the only one. This word is literally known by agents and editors around the world as like the big no-no word because people use it so often. It is not just you guys, it is everyone in existence. Suddenly is the thing.
I'm trying to use more abruptly and also just start a new paragraph. So he
Yes.
felt this but suddenly
Yep. Just say what happens. Have it be abrupt for the reader too. But yes. So that being said, suddenly is one of those ones that generally, if you find it in your scary story, just delete that right out, and you will probably get rid of at least 5. More than likely, most people have a minimum of 5 in their short stories. You sometimes more, but minimum of 5.
What if you have like one word of the word count and like all of it's completely like absolutely necessary? Like
I would say go in and look for ones that could be a conjunction. So for example, if you say they would not ever do that, make it wouldn't. You'll be surprised how many times you run into that, where you either haven't made something a conjunction, or in the case of needing more words, like with essays, you've made it a conjunction and you could make it not a conjunction. I would say that is the easiest way if you've gone over the word count to fix it. If you're like one over. But anyway, that being said, next I would say see, look, feel, because those are all signs of telling things. Another great example is like here.
What about she felt
No.
the grass on her fingertips?
Yep, that's not good.
Why?
Instead, because of the fact that it's telling. What you should do instead is say the grass was soft on her fingertips. She's feeling it. You don't have to say feel. So as a result, I totally understand it, but at the same time, this is one of those tricky things where you just have to say what is happening. You don't need these filler words. They really are filler words. They're not fully necessary. Another great example is like smell or smelled or things like that. You can just say the sweet aroma reached her nose. You don't have to say it smelled like the sweetest thing she'd ever smelled. Not necessary. And so as a result, you'll run into things like that. You also have ones like she realized. Instead, just have her realize it. Just say, hey, this is what she's realizing, instead
do
of
you
saying
say
the word
that?
realizing. So for example, if she's realizing that the person is evil, you could have her go, she's evil. You don't have to say she realized she was evil. You can just say, she's evil, and have it in like italics so it sounds like a thought.
Oh.
And then she's realizing she's evil.
Got it.
Yeah, these are all great questions. Another great one that you can delete is like or seemed.
Oh my gosh. Wait, sorry, real quick.
Yes, question.
So one time I was driving to my friend's house to drop her off at like 10 o'clock. And what?
You were driving?
No, I wasn't driving. My mom
Anyway,
was driving.
point being.
And my dad was in the no, actually my dad was driving, sorry. And
Anyway,
my mom was in the
point
passenger
being.
seat. And every time one of us said like unnecessarily, my dad would go ding.
Yes.
It was
You
so
will
annoying.
you will be surprised how many times you will say the word like in your average everyday sentences.
Actually though.
Yeah, my dad was trying to see a lot of words that we use, you know, literally, lying and stuff like that.
Yep. And so,
Literally is
yes.
how the
Literally.
for example, if that is another great one that's actually on my list is, for example, it was literally awesome. Just say it was awesome.
It was
Not necessary to have the
awesome,
literally.
bro.
Also, seemed is a great one that you can get rid of because it either is or it isn't.
But if it's from
Sometimes-
the character's perspective
sometimes-
and they're like, it's probably that, but I don't know.
True. And in that case, it's okay. But most of the time, people use the word seemed, and it's not even for the character's benefit. It's just, I want to say the word seemed here. And it's like, okay, you don't need it unless it's for the character's benefit. That being said, other ones are such as decided, like it's the same as realized. Like if they decided something, just have them do the thing. Noticed, felt, remembered,
Can you
think.
have, like, sorry.
Yes, question.
So, like,
Happy to have you ask as many questions as you want.
instead of them thinking
Mhm.
and being like, I'm gonna stop Mistress, like,
I need to stop her.
I'm gonna stop Mistress Jane, can you have them, like, say it to the other characters? Be like, we're
Yeah.
gonna stop her. Yeah.
Yeah,
we're gonna stop her.
absolutely.
We're gonna stop.
Also, I would say another great one that you can delete is use action tags instead of dialogue tags.
What's
Now,
action tag?
that's a great question. I was about to go into that, so I'm glad you asked. No, you're okay. No need to apologize. It's a good thing. So, a great example of a dialogue tag is, for example, we're running out of food, she exclaimed. That's a dialogue tag. You don't necessarily need that. If it is clear that she is speaking, you don't even have to have that. But if you feel that you need to clear up who is speaking, it's better to do an action tag, which is like, we're running out of food. She was pacing back and forth and was absolutely distraught.
Yeah.
That is going
So
to...
instead, punching him in the stomach.
Exactly. So that's giving you a sense of what's going on with the characters, and it's doing double duty by identifying who is speaking. So that is an action tag.
I can
Yes.
do that.
Action tags are incredibly cool.
I feel like
They're
it's
very
going
useful.
to one. And he said, and then
Yes,
she
and
said,
that's totally fine. But if you're working on word count, I would say action tags are your best friend. That being said, another example of things that you can get rid of is that. You would be surprised how many times you will have the word that in your story that isn't necessary. Yes. Exactly. I totally get that. Ha ha ha. Anyway, I didn't even mean to say it. Another great example of ones you can get rid of are really and very. You generally don't need really and very. If you want it to be more, so for example, she was really excited. Instead, just show us how excited she is. She's jumping up and down. You don't need to say she's really excited. Again, this is about showing instead of telling mostly. Another great example is down and up. For example, if they're going down the stairs, that's fine. But however, if they're sitting down, it's already implied they're going down by the act of sitting. Unless they're sitting up, in which case, then you do need to clarify that. So,
how did you set it up?
exactly, that's why sitting up from like if you are lying down and then sitting up. But yes, so it's only important to say words like up or down if it's not already implied by what it is. For example, standing up. You don't need to say up. Generally when people are standing, they're not standing down unless it is in the case of like surrendering or something like that. But if they are doing the act of standing, it's already implied they're moving in an upward direction. So you don't need to say up. Yes.
Bend the physics.
Bend the physics. If you're bending physics, then by all means change this rule, but most of the time this is the case. If it is implied that you are going down or up, then you don't need to say down or up after it. It is one of those redundancies that a lot of people do. Another great one that you can delete is then.
What about bam?
Then is different. Then you're generally comparing something, but then, like, and then it happened. Instead, just say, it happened. I can't believe it happened. You don't need the then. Unnecessary word. Next, I would say things like began, started, and even the words just and the. Most of the time, just doesn't need to be there. And with the word the, sometimes it needs to be there, but there's a surprising amount of times when the doesn't need to be there.
What if somebody accuses someone of something and then you're like, I was just in the parking lot?
Yeah, you don't need to say that. You can just say, I was in the parking lot.
Okay.
So as a result, that's one of those ones where it's like word count. Again, this is about working with very strict word counts when it comes to competitions, if you ever want to enter them. Next thing that I would say also is an example with when the needs to be deleted is instead of saying the wind rattled the door, just say wind rattled the doors. Or in this case, the door. No need to have the extra the before wind. Or if you're saying like the rain was pouring down, just say rain poured down. And so as a result, not necessary always. All right, last thing that I'm going to say with deleting things is redundancy problems. This happens a lot in the English language. I was actually shocked when I was looking up like common redundancies we say in the English language. I was like, oh my gosh, I do like 90% of these. So redundancy is when you say something twice on accident. For example, added bonus. Has anyone ever said that? More than likely you have.
Yeah.
But you don't need to. Bonus already means added. So you don't need to say added bonus. No need for it.
Added.
And so as a result, there are a lot of things like that in the English language where you might not even realize you're saying the same thing twice. So just keep that in mind. Now we're going to talk a little bit about scary story stuff in specific. So if you guys have any questions regarding the scary story contest or tips and tricks on writing scary stories, by all means feel free to either ask now or I will just continue to tell you my opinions on how to write great scary stories. Cool, I'll just go then. If you have questions, feel free. Oh, okay.
If I had a psychological horror movie about someone losing control of their power and destroying their entire civilization, is there like a darkness limit? Like it's not gory, but it's dark.
No, there is not a darkness limit. If you want, you can pass this around and read the official rules. If you are interested, if you're not interested, then just pass it to whoever is interested. If it is graphically descripted, yes.
If you mention it though.
If you just said something like they moaned in pain and it was clear they had been tortured, that's fine. But if you're like, you know, they had scars bleeding everywhere, like, too much.
What about just scars?
Scars is fine, but generally that's not graphic violence. Graphic violence is when it's actively oozing and bleeding everywhere.
Okay.
So, that being said,
So I could have a psychological.
you could have a psychological horror. With the escape room one, that is a great example of a psychological horror because in a lot of cases, they aren't showing them dying. They're like falling in a pit or something like that. And so as a result, you don't actually see them die in a very graphic way, but you know they did.
Hey, have you seen Pacific Rim?
Yes, I have.
I love Pacific Rim. It's my favorite movie right now.
It is really good. Anyway, so with scary stories, the top things that are going to help you have a really good, intense, scary story, even with this insane word count limit, is, and I only say insane word count limit just because you've practiced doing my contests, which have 6 times the limit pretty much for this one. So it's perfectly a reasonable short story limit, and there are actually a lot of contests that do this or shorter. However, yeah, they exist, and they're actually incredibly common. But at the same time, I know that you guys have practiced doing my 6,000 one, so this might feel insane to you, even if it's unfortunately
6,000 the limit
reasonable.
for you?
Yeah,
What's the limit for this one?
1,200. Hence why I was like, it might feel a little wild in comparison to mine, but it is actually considered reasonable amongst most communities. Anyway, that being said, and when I say communities, I obviously mean writers' communities. Anyway, so, yes, please give me back that copy because I do need it. But, so this setting is going to really help set the mood. You want to make sure that you have it described in an eerie way. For example, instead of just saying the wind whistled through the trees, you could say the wind whistled through the trees like a gallows man heading to a hanging, or something like that. Like, that's extra creepy, right? That gives you a creepy vibe instead of just being like, it is a thing. So you can display the setting in such a way that it makes it feel creepier than just stating what it is. Next thing I would say, make sure you are playing off of the idea of the unknown. Like I said earlier, you want to imply a lot of different things. Don't just say serial killer. Instead, maybe have them, hear someone screaming in the other room, and then they go to look and they're like, oh my gosh, she's dead. You don't necessarily have to see the serial killer killing them. You just know what's happening, and in some ways that is actually scarier for people to not see what is happening than it is to see what is happening. That's why a lot of times psychological horrors and things like that are so creepy, because of the fact that you don't see 90% of the scary stuff, but that's what makes it scary. Another one is taking something that's normal and making it unique or unexpected. So, for example, spiders are very scary, but how are you going to make them uniquely scary?
Spider-Man.
Anyway, so with that being said, make sure it's unique and unexpected. Make sure you're not just like, spiders are scary, woo! Like, what is scary about these specific spiders? What makes them different from other spiders? Next thing I would say is use shorter sentences when you want to help induce panic in the reader, because of the fact that it feels very similar to hyperventilating, reading short sentences, and so it's going to induce that same feeling in the reader. Another great way to induce feelings in the reader is use longer sentences to help increase tension or anxiety. With the example of the wind whistling through the wind earlier, it's a very long sentence, which would be perfect to use if a killer is hunting someone down. Because in that case, then you're going, oh my gosh, they are actively hunting them, and these long sentences won't end soon enough so I can figure out what just happened. And so as a result, it creates an intensity in the reader. The next thing that I would also mention is point of view. 99.9% of the time you want to use third person limited, because of the fact that it leaves more to the imagination. Which is why it's good for scary stories. However, when it comes to using first person, if you use first person, you got to make sure that you have reasons why they don't know certain information and why they haven't seen certain things and why they don't know those things. So again, possible, trickier. That's why third person is generally the go-to. And third person limited. If you start doing omniscient, I would highly recommend you start having people.
Viewpoint. Have you read that book?
No, I've not. But with third person omniscient, where it's basically you're going around into everyone else's heads, and yes, that is different from head hopping, but that's another day's lesson. Yes, question.
Okay, this is kind of, I don't know what this counts as. What if you have first person?
Yes.
Okay, what point of view would it be if it's a first person telepath that knows everything? Would it still be first person?
Technically, it's still first person. They're just reading other people's thoughts. The only way it becomes omniscient is if she not only knows everyone else's thoughts, but she knows their feelings, she knows their backstory, she knows their lives. That's omniscient.
Okay, but what if
So,
there was actually a character in the story? Does that still work?
yes,
There
that still
what?
works.
If the omniscient narrator is still in the story, like as a character?
Yes, so long as you explain why they're omniscient.
They have superpowers.
Just
like
because of the fact that
Psychic
most people don't
What?
know everything.
Yeah,
I
So, that being said, I would also say not great for a scary story, because if they already know everything, then they know what the monster is, they know why it's scary at the end. No longer scary.
That's not scary.
Yeah, so that's the main issue with scary stories. But if you're doing other stories, by all means, omniscient person, all the way.
It's fun.
That's fun to have.
Yeah.
So with third person omniscient, it's basically where you as the author are telling the story and telling them what's going on in all of these people's heads and what's going on, I would not recommend it for this because then you'd also have to probably include the monster's point of view, which though that could be fun, it's going to get really confusing really fast, and especially with a really short word count, it's going to get extra confusing really, really fast. And you don't want confused readers. Confused readers equal unhappy readers. If they are like intrigued or like a little confused, that's fine. But if they're just sitting there going, what? That's not pleasant for the reader. Next thing I would say, like I mentioned earlier, is you don't always need a plot twist. In fact, most of the time you don't need a plot twist. I would avoid them generally in short stories unless you can do them within the word limit, and the main issue here is within the word limit. With my 6,000 words, it is possible, but it is tricky. With 1,200 words or less, I would never recommend a plot twist. It's almost impossible to pull off. By all means. All right. So that being said, if you could pass the paper back to me, if someone could grab it and pass it back to me, just so I can tell you guys all when that is due, that would be great.
I've had a chance to look at it.
Oh, okay, great. Can you just tell me what the due date is on that so that way I can tell everyone else?
Maybe you should because my brain's
Yeah,
not
it's
working.
okay. It is October 12th. So it is actually later than I thought. I was saying 7th because in the past they've always done the first week of October, but it turns out they're actually doing the 12th. So as a result, you can start turning them in as early as September 3rd, but the latest you can turn it in is October 12th. I would highly recommend getting here at least an hour before we close because generally we have people banging on our doors and we can't let you in once we're closed.
I found a loophole. So you said we can enter our estimates we want in this contest.
Yes, however you do have to pay for all of them.
So you could technically write more than 100,000 words if you just have in separate stories. You say end of part 1, end of part 2, end of part 50.
Yeah, no, at that point I feel like we'd have to disqualify you two, unfortunately, because of the fact that that's
Cheating.
not...
There's nothing against the rules.
No, I know, but then, yeah, there's been several rules that have been made because of people doing stuff that we're like, okay. So, as a result, do you guys have any more questions regarding scary story writing? Yes.
I was just wondering, do you
Or
judge
stories
the
in
scary
general.
stories?
Yes,
contest,
I will be
or-
judging the scary story
Okay.
contest.
And it's like the same judges
Same judges as before. Me and two of my friends, you're aware of them, Miranda and Nicole. She knows them from Dungeons & Dragons, or she knows Nicole. You know
Yeah, I
Miranda,
know
she
Nicole.
works at the front desk. But anyway, but that being said, Miranda has a degree in creative writing. I also have a degree in creative writing, as well as my editing certification. And then Nicole is getting a degree in teaching. So as a result, all of them are highly qualified, wonderful people. They are the ones who graded all the other contests as well. Yeah, so it used to be that she would just kind of find graders before, the person who's in charge of this, but we offered to help because of the fact that we've been doing all the other contests, and she said that was great. So we are now the graders. Yes, question? Yeah, by all means. It is 4:18. This lesson went insanely long today because it had a lot of material. But speaking of which, I'm going to turn this off now. However, if you ever have questions as to word count or are struggling to get your word count down below whatever limit you're struggling with, please let me know. I would be happy to give you, I would say use all these suggestions first. Then if you're still over the word count after using all of these suggestions, then feel free to talk to me. And I'm more than happy to try and help you combat the issue of word count, because it is an issue. It is hard to deal with word counts. Even the 6,000 word count, I've had several people contact me and be like, I'm way over. So like, word limits are hard, irregardless of how short or long they are. So again, feel free to use all these and contact me if you're struggling at all. The contest after this one is going to be the first chapter contest, so if you're not interested in doing scary stories, that's okay. Feel free to work on the first chapter contest, because those will start being due by the end of November. And then we will have the Cozy Mystery Contest in December. That will be due on the 21st, just so that way you guys can get it in before you hit the holidays, to give us enough time to grade, so we can actually, have a holiday. And then we will start all over again starting next February, so that should be delightful. Thank you guys so much for coming and for listening. I will turn off the video now and we can go to questions and editing/talking time.